Hey, good afternoon. I'm Keith Readling with Raftelis. This is our data forensics webinar, Restoring Confidence in Your Organization's Information. I'm really excited to be with folks today, and we had a big list of people sign up for this, and we already have more than 80 people in the room. It's 2:01 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to get started. We have 4 presenters today. I'll present first and do some easy stuff, and then I'll come in at the end and do some easy stuff. And you'll notice the emphasis on my role is the easy stuff. I've been around a while and I get to pick the easy stuff. And we have 3 main presenters who are going to talk about technical content. These are 3 folks I work with every day and enjoy every minute of it. Chris McPhee, Jen Tavantzis, and Katie Cromwell, and they're going to go in that order. I might do 5 minutes and then Chris will be up. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to talk a minute about why you might do a deep dive on your data, how we do analysis like this. Then we have 3 case studies, and that's going to be Chris, Jen, and Katie. I'll talk again, back to the easy stuff, on outcomes for just a minute. And we certainly want to try to deal with some questions and answer them. There's a Q&A feature in this webinar down at the bottom. If you jiggle your mouse, you can see things pop up at the bottom of the Zoom. Q&A is one of them. If you have a question or a comment, we want you to type it in the Q&A box. We're not going to deal with those live during the presentation, but we are going to deal with them as soon as we get to that section. And my hope is that we'll have enough time at the end of the hour to cover a good many. So why dive deep into your data? There's a few reasons. And what I would say is primarily, you could almost recharacterize this webinar as, why do my data try to lie to me, and how do I make it tell me the truth? And so why you might go deep is to improve your decisions, increase your customer responsiveness. If you've gone through a billing system conversion and confidence has waned a little bit in the accuracy of your data or your reporting or your communications. If you just did a 5% rate increase and revenues went up 1% or worse, went down 2%, try to figure out what happened and recover the lost revenue. Improve your processes, or try to translate complicated subjects into more straightforward kinds of issues and deal with your customers with plain language. And there's some pretty common questions and concerns we get in the business. And I've got a few listed here on the broad questions front. Why'd my revenues go down? Did our new rate structure get implemented, kind of flawlessly from the policy that we intended? Is everybody following our SOPs? What could we do that might improve something? And then we get some specific questions sometimes, like, why are multiple data sources that I'm dealing with contradictory? Well, maybe you have a live data set, you have a data warehouse that has a different date stamp. Is something happening there? Or did we recently change a process or a policy? And if we did that possibly propagate through to change the way things are being handled in an unexpected way? So lots of kinds of questions that could be kind of asked and answered in the course of a deeper dive. And we have a pretty standard process for the analysis when we get involved in these. And it has 7 steps. It kind of starts out simple and ends with flying cars in step 7, not really flying cars. But the process, maybe the beginning point, is about the most important thing, and that is, be sure you know the question you're trying to answer and the problem you're trying to solve before you start. Because if you don't, it'll just be luck if you end up solving it. So that's our first step. The second step is gathering data from the disparate places where it lives. The organization that you work for probably has a CIS. I know you have a financial reporting system. You might have a data warehouse, a GIS. You might consume a lot of GIS data from other government agencies. You may have asset management and reporting data. And there's also a lot of publicly available data. In North Carolina, a lot of times aerial photography is publicly available from the state. And we use Google Maps and Google Street View a lot for some of our work. So gathering all the data, and then in the third step, translating, compiling, indexing, and getting that data into a location or an ecosystem where it can talk to each other and where you can begin to make real headway. So that's our first 3 steps. Then we have 4 more steps, and I'm almost finished with my part, I promise. After we get all of it in one place, we do a high-level aggregate analysis and try to identify trends and anomalies. If the problem statement was, I raised rates 5% across the board and revenues went up 1, at this high-level aggregate analysis point, we might see that residential billings are always lagging. Commercial looks like it did go up 5. So maybe that, maybe not. Then in our next step, we separate patterns into cases, and we're looking for individual examples of each case and making sure those are similar or adding subcases. So we worked on projects where we had cases 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but after a couple of passes, it was 1, 2, 3A, 3B, 3C, 4A, 4B, 5, and then 3A became 3A1 and 3A2. Case it out and then discuss the cases and examples amongst everybody and try to figure out what the root causes are that are causing the unexpected behavior or the bust in the process. And then finally, once we're pretty sure we've gotten to the bottom of it, come up with the fix and come up with a way that the problem can't happen again. So create triggers, hooks, QC steps, or something to make changes to a process or a technology so that the outcomes are improved. So that's our standard process. Each of our case studies is going to talk about those a little bit, and we're ready to talk case studies now, and Chris is up first.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate you reviewing the process that we like to use when we look closely at organizational data. We've applied that analysis process to answer all sorts of questions for utility and local government organizations. We're going to share a few examples of how this analysis process can be applied to answer some more challenging questions. Now, we've chosen to anonymize the cities shown in our examples due to the sensitive nature of this work and some of the findings that you'll see. Some of the questions that Keith mentioned earlier are hard to unravel, but we also look at pretty fundamental questions like the one posed by City A. On the next slide, our team was assisting City A with financial planning work. During the data review process, we encountered gaps in the billing data related to the number of customers in each category, especially when compared with historical information. Staff mentioned that they had recently seen examples coming in through customer service of older properties requesting property transfers that they didn't see in the billing system. This might seem strange to everybody on the call here, but this city provides non-metered sewer services, while water is provided by a separate third party. City A can gather metering information from this third party, but it doesn't always relate well to the information they have on hand in their billing system. So property boundaries tend to represent the closest analog for their customer base. So their big question was, who are our customers? The goal of our analysis was to identify properties that should be receiving service that weren't currently in the billing system. Understanding how the city provides service, we learned that storm sewer customers included all properties in the city boundaries, while sanitary sewer customers could be identified based on known line locations and from the asset management software. As a result, we thought we could best answer the question, who are our customers, by combining geographic data with billing data. We worked with staff from City A to pull together geographic and billing data from different sources, as well as a few publicly available data sets. The geographic data could be used to determine who should be billed, while the billing data could help us understand who is being billed. The data sets listed here could be combined to give us the best picture of what properties were most likely to be receiving services provided by the city. For example, we could use tax improvement values to understand if a property has structures that are likely receiving sewer services. We could use those tax values to eliminate properties that had no improvement from the non-billing list. We could also use stormwater impervious area boundaries as a guarantee that a property should be billed the stormwater fee. We then worked to relate these data sets to one another so that gaps in billing could be identified. We reconciled geographic and billing data by relating known identifiers such as account and parcel IDs, as well as service addresses, to successfully match 99% of the billing records, the parcels, and the service area. We loaded other relevant data tables into a single database to facilitate narrowing down the possible non-billing customers to reduce false positives. So you're sort of seeing some of the steps that Keith mentioned, gathering all the data together in one place to help relate it to one another. For our high-level analysis, we then thematically mapped parcels in GIS within the service area to show which were included in the billing system versus those that were not being billed. What we found was that over 10% of the properties were not currently in the billing system. As described in our analysis process, we separated all of those properties into cases relating to the type of service, the customer classification, and location within the service area. We then reviewed these cases with city staff and learned that one case shown here on the slide, residential condominiums, were actually billed in aggregate in the billing system. We worked back and forth with billing staff to understand the different billing arrangements and could eliminate some of the cases from our list. We continued to refine the list by working closely with staff until we arrived at a set of properties where we couldn't explain what was going on with the data that we had on hand. The vast majority of the non-billing properties were older properties where services were started before digital record keeping was in place. So they didn't make it into the most recent billing system. Based upon our findings, we were able to recommend processes to city staff to research and start billing on the remaining list of properties. We were also able to provide our reconciliation data relating GIS parcel boundaries to billing data so that staff could use a similar process in the future on their own without our assistance. This work uncovered a significant amount of lost revenues, you can see here on the screen, that impacted the financial planning study so that rates would not need to be significantly increased in the near term. While our findings were primarily for the benefit of city staff, customers also benefit due to the improved responsiveness to inquiries when they call in. We were pleased that a seemingly simple question resulted in such a positive benefit to City A. Now, while this was a relatively simple question, we'll turn it over to Jen Tavantzis for a more complicated scenario.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Our next case study is, of course, City B, which operates a water and sewer utility. At the time of our involvement with this city, they had a fairly complex set of circumstances surrounding their utility administration and one overarching issue. They were not realizing expected revenue after a fairly significant rate increase. That rate increase was accompanied by some changes to the rate structure for water and sewer. The utility was also in the middle of a transition to AMI and planning for a conversion from their legacy billing system to a new CIS software, which was all the more reason to make sure the data were valid and correct. On top of all of that, utility leadership had started hearing rumors about staff misuse of the billing system to help certain customers avoid being billed or avoid enforcement. So we embarked on an investigation to see if we could help them get to the bottom of the big question, why anticipated revenue wasn't being realized, with those key areas of interest defined up front, as Keith mentioned. The city provided us a large amount of data, including a full copy of their production billing database, which was a mainframe system containing the last 12 billing records for each customer. They billed bi-monthly, so that was 2 years worth of data. In addition, we also received thousands of daily history logs on adjustments, payments of various types, and most user edits, which we pieced together to show some long-term trends. At the most basic level, the long-term trends showed that overall the number of accounts had been slightly decreasing, while consumption remained steady, indicating a slight increase in usage per customer. And for the other observations, we can look at a graph on the next slide. This graph shows a number of key metrics for the full study period from 15 years before the present year at the time of the analysis up to the present year. Billings before the recent rate increase, which had become effective in the present year, had risen steadily over time, aligning with rates and consumption data. However, billings did not demonstrate as big of a jump as we would have expected to see in the present year due to that recent rate increase. It also appeared that the value of adjustments relative to billings had started increasing drastically after the recent rate increase. Payments, though increasing, were not on track with expected goals due to those compounding conditions, the relatively lower billings, high adjustments, and lower than typical collection rate. Those same conditions also resulted in increasing customer balances. Mapping those long-term trends helped us figure out where to focus our attention. Based on the first thing I pointed out in the graph, those lower than expected billings, we dug into the application of the rate structure and rate change in the billing system, starting with recreating the bills for the most recent periods. In doing that, we quickly found a pretty major flaw in the city's minimum monthly sewer charge, which accounted for a 50% loss in sewer revenue from some accounts. These customers were being charged a monthly minimum sewer fee on a bi-monthly schedule. In the affected year, this amounted to about $1 million in missed billings. The city's production billing system also revealed many accounts with invalid data conditions. As a few examples, there were accounts with indicators that they were both inside and outside of the city, which are two geographies with different rates. We also found numerous accounts that had apartment unit data, which were also coded as single-family residential or other types of customer classes. These types of inconsistencies confused the rate calculation and in some cases kept bills from being generated at all. These were concerns, of course, for correct bill calculation in the present, but also highlighted potential issues down the line as they look toward billing system conversion. There were several other notable findings from our analysis. Lots of accounts that were in a non-billed status, which in some cases was because they triggered exceptions or had those inconsistent data conditions I just discussed, but others were there seemingly without reason and had been put there by users. For example, there were accounts flagged as vacant, causing them not to be billed, that were still showing consistent consumption on that bi-monthly schedule. Those non-billed accounts represented about $50,000 in lost revenue in the most recent fiscal year. There were also a number of individual accounts with exceptionally high or frequent adjustments being made by users. This small subset of adjustments totaled over $1 million in the most recent fiscal year, which was pretty substantial. There were also accounts inaccurately coded as government or education, which were exempt from enforcement. And those accounts had accrued about $2.6 million in outstanding balances. And finally, we saw several cases of repeat and targeted due date extensions for specific customers. I mentioned at the top that the utility was transitioning to AMI, and at the time of the analysis, the project was not especially far along, but there were some new meters in use, and we were able to make some observations about the data they provided as well. A larger than expected proportion of them were consistently reading 0 or very low consumption when compared to the same accounts prior to the meter change. And there were numerous meters reporting consumption out of tolerance, contributing to those set of non-billed accounts. Our investigation uncovered a lot of different problems related to the billing data. But the good news is that all of the findings were actionable and could be resolved fairly quickly to address the immediate revenue problem and limit issues in the future. Those resolutions focused around the system, the data, and the people. So from a system perspective, the critical fix was to update bill calculation logic to fix the misapplication of the rate structure. On the data side, there could be fixes done to address the inaccurately or inconsistently coded accounts, limiting accounts in non-bill or no enforcement type statuses, and ensuring accurate bill calculation. And on the people side, there were steps taken to tighten up user permissions, kind of aligning them with intended roles so fewer individuals could change underlying data. And importantly, establishing and enforcing user policies to limit unintended adjustments and other data changes. So again, good actionable outcomes that really helped the utility get back on track. And that is it for City B. So I will turn it over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Jen. So compared to cities A and B, the data analysis for City C was a little more straightforward, but the drivers behind the data analysis and the conditions that caused them to seek out this type of analysis was a little bit more unique. So this city needed a long overdue billing system upgrade. But when they were finally able to invest in this upgrade, the conversion did not go as they expected. Some customers did not receive bills at all. Some customers received incorrect bills, and customers arrived in droves at the customer service center with questions about their bills, concerns about accuracy, and just general worry about getting shut off. Furthermore, the firm that was tasked with completing the billing system upgrade blamed city staff on the conversion failure. So after a lot of hard work, the city believed that the billing system errors had been corrected, but damage had already been done, resulting in a complete lack of customer confidence in the accuracy of the billing. So in an effort to confirm that the billing system errors had in fact been corrected, identify any outstanding billing errors that had not been corrected, identify any process problems or failures, and help to restore customer confidence in utility billing, the city hired Raftelis to complete an independent audit of their billing data, document the findings, and report the results to the city council. So for this effort, all the bills were audited for a 10-month period. And that included a period of time before the billing conversion, the period of time during the conversion process, and finally a period of time after the conversion was considered complete. And the billing system billed for all of the city's utilities. So this included electric, water, sewer, and solid waste. And so we had to look at charges for all of these services, and they all needed to be reviewed. And then bills that were unexpected were identified, researched, and as we've been talking about, classified into different cases. So the audit process started with acquiring and manipulating the data, and we received data on meter reads for the 10-month period, as well as printed bills from the legacy billing system, the new billing system. Data for this city was in a variety of formats. So there were text files, there were PDF files, there were reams of paper. And so all of this data had to be manipulated and loaded into a relational database for further analysis. Then, using the rate schedules for each of the services, logic was developed to calculate all the bills for all of the services. Again, that's electric, water, sewer, and solid waste. So development of the logic in some cases was an iterative process to make sure that the logic was correctly reflecting the rate schedules as well as the billing policies of the city. And then this final logic was then applied to recreate charges for the whole 10-month period. And then the last part of the process was the recreated bills were compared against the actual bills from the legacy billing system and then from the actual bills in the new billing system. So if the recreated bills differed from actual bills from either the legacy billing system or the new billing system, then the bill was considered unexpected. And then these were the bills that were then subject to further research. So to talk a little bit more about unexpected bills. So unexpected bills were defined as bills where the recreated charges based on usage or account characteristics did not result in the same dollar charge on the bill as what we would have expected. And then furthermore, that difference can't be explained through account balances, adjustments, penalties, interest, or any other transactions that are going on associated with that account. So all of the other bills where, we couldn't explain any of the differences, those were the ones that were considered unexpected and then subject to the further research. So once the unexpected bills were identified, they were researched to identify the cause. And was it due to a process failure in the billing system, an inaccurate application of billing rates or rate structure, or inaccurate application of billing policies? Those are all things that we looked into. And so shown in the slide are some of the specific processes that we closely documented and reviewed, given that this was a billing system conversion problem. And so all of these were part of the research process. And then unexpected bills, like I said, were classified into cases based on the source or the cause of the unexpected bill. So the findings from the audit were as follows. So you'll notice overall the percentage of unexpected bills was low. But if we compare the unexpected bills in the legacy billing system to the new billing system did have some more unexpected bills that, would indicate that there may still be a few outstanding issues associated with the conversion that were not fully resolved. And I think this is especially true if you look at the electric bills, where there were 22 times higher number of unexpected bills with the new billing system as compared to the legacy billing system. So just to talk about some outcomes for the legacy billing system, we found that meter reads were being imported correctly, compound meters were handled as we would have expected, budget billing was in alignment with our policies, and other billing cases and scenarios were being handled as we would have expected. So that resulted in, very, very low numbers of unexpected bills. For the new billing system, we found that there were 3 main issues identified, and that included inaccurate meter readings. The new billing system didn't handle compound electric meters as they were supposed to be handled. And then there were some discrepancies related to budget billing calculations. So the budget billing numbers weren't in alignment with what the city's policy was on how those would be calculated. But still, as you can see, overall, the unexpected bills really only made up a small percentage of the bills for both the legacy billing system and the new billing system. So being able to report these findings gave the city specific measurable data that they could use to help repair their customer relationships and give them confidence that billing was being completed correctly in most cases. So for the issues identified, the city could resolve those issues in the new billing system to further improve billing accuracy, particularly as it related to the electric bills. And they also knew now that only a few customers were being impacted by those issues. So overall, while these customer relationships really can't be repaired overnight, this was a really powerful step in the right direction for the city to be able to help restore customer confidence in their billing. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Keith for some final thoughts and conclusions.
Back to the easy stuff. So a few thoughts here, and then I'm delighted. We have 6. We had a lot of good questions roll in during the presentation. Some of them were very straightforward, and we've typed answers. And if you go to the Q&A, you'll see there are 6 answered questions and 6 open. The answered ones have typed answers. The open ones we're going to answer verbally. So let me make a couple of concluding remarks, and then I'm going to try to quarterback the Q&A too. So what you heard on these 3 was, can you go to the next slide? What you heard on these 3 was in 2 cases out of 3, we found ways to increase revenue. In case C, we found a little bit, but not a lot. But in C, the mission really was vindication. And I think we got that. So in a lot of cases, the result is going to be found money. And in every case, a greater understanding of the way that the processes and the systems are tied together. I think probably about half the time, there's a bump in customer confidence that comes from this, but there is a time lag on that, and Katie mentioned it. Even if your data and processes are almost perfect, if the public perception is that it's not good or it got worse, or, you know, back when I used to blah, 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 it was a lot better, it just takes a while for that to recover. But I think what you have to do first is send out accurate bills and have tight, repeatable processes, and the customer confidence comes over time. We almost always are able to improve reporting and be able to track what's going on better. And we often discover things that result in an increase in equity. So there's some steady results. In the case of A and B, money was found, revenues went up. In the case of C, a city manager who'd been there a long time was able to stay there and not have to leave. So as questions come up, if you have any more, put them in the chat box. But let's go ahead and hit the thank you slide real quick. And I'm going to quarterback these questions, and we're going to do that starting right now. So let's go cameras on for my team. Slideshow in so that our pictures are bigger. And I'm going to start at the top. We got 25 minutes. Even as slow as I talk, I think we can do 6 answers. So the first question is, what kind of tools do you use in your various analyses? Do you use the same tools for every city or client, or does it vary? Do you find some of these tools more useful than others? We're going to answer that live. And Chris, I think you'd be a good one for that.
Sure, that sounds good, Keith. I appreciate the question. You know, it really does depend on what the question is. So as you saw, some of these, you know, the first one involved using GIS software. You know, there's kind of one industry leading platform, ArcGIS, that's used to analyze GIS data. Primarily, we like to work directly with the data in an enterprise database environment. So we'll try to aggregate all these different sources into one location like we described in each of these case studies, and then work directly with that data. There are a number of statistics packages that we like to use, like R, SAS, to do some of the high-level analysis and maybe help with some of the visualization as well. And over the course of doing this, for many years, we've developed some of our own internal tools, like address matching tools and geocoding tools and things like that help us relate the data sources to one another. So it does really vary on the type of analysis, but most of the stuff is off the shelf. A few of them we've developed ourselves.
And I'll add, I mentioned Google Street View earlier. It's one of my favorites because it's pretty simple. And the address matching that Chris talks about, he's developed some pretty sophisticated software in-house that we use for that. That's been great. So I'm going to click done on that one. And our next question is, what can the cities or organizations do with the data internal processes to help themselves or prevent some of these issues when implementing rate changes and new billing systems? All right, so smart people think about smart answers. I've got one little piece of an answer here, and that is, if you're working in a system where you can't readily get your hands on your own raw data, and therefore you can't independently validate what's happening, I think that's one of the things that you could do for yourself that would be helpful. Basically to say, just think about running it just like your finances at your house. If you were lucky enough to get a 4% raise and none of your bills went up, you're kind of thinking you might be able to save more money. And you need to be able to look at your checkbook and figure out what's going on in your credit card bill. And if you're not able to look at that kind of data in your CIS because it's locked down so tight, all you've got is some kind of not the right reporting, then I think finding a way to get at your source data in a raw form is one thing you can do, and just keep an eye on it. Don't wait and wonder what's happening. Keep one eye on it all the time. Who else can add to that?
Well, I'll add one thing, Keith. To your point, different systems have different kind of reporting capabilities and data structures, and so all of that will play into what can be done in-house. Certainly, continuous QC of the data is highly important, and I think everyone is pretty accustomed to running reports on what is being billed and what is being collected. But it's important to look at things from the other perspective too. What else might be in the system and where's it falling through the cracks?
Good.
Keith, I've got one more before you move off of that one. We're talking a lot about systems and data and information. I think one of the biggest things to think about when implementing a rate change or a new system is the people that are working for your organization, because those folks, they really know what's going on the ground. The billing folks, the customer service folks, they're dealing with people every day, and they really understand, some of the most common cases that are coming through. They're often the people that identify, miscategorize things first. So really working closely with those folks first off is really important.
Good, real good. All right, I'm going to call that one done. Next one, for these case studies, do you have data on the sizes for the cities? Yes, we do. And Chris, do you know about how many accounts for A?
Yeah, City A was about 60,000 accounts, and the project took about 6 weeks.
And B was a little under 60, I think. Is that right, Jen?
B was actually only about 30,000 accounts. And those, again, were kind of inside the city and outside the city.
And C was the smallest of all, right, Katie?
Yeah, that was about 16,000, I think.
And how long did these analyses take? Well, it seemed like they took forever, but
Well,
like Chris said, A was 6 weeks. C was hurry up. We can't afford one more newspaper article about this.
exactly.
B probably took the longest. It was also the deepest dive in terms of data analysis. If you remember from Jen's rundown on B, we had about 11 zillion records to go through and figure out what it all meant and get it into an ecosystem where we could ask and answer questions. We have done this kind of work for lots bigger places that didn't make the case study list. Katie and I just finished doing one that was, you know, the one I'm talking about. How many accounts are they? 60,
Yeah, something like that.
quite a bit more. So I'm going to call that one done. Have there been any legal or internal audit concerns, fraud, ethical violations? Is this a discussion point with clients prior to analysis? That is an awesomely good question. So in the case of C, the city retained an outside attorney to review what was going on, and the attorney retained us. And that was very purposeful to create and maintain attorney-client privilege for the work that we did. What we ended up discovering was that things were pretty good, and they were largely vindicated on the conversion they had done. But I don't think that they knew that's where it was going at the beginning, or they probably wouldn't have hired us to start with. So we do work in cases where an attorney is retained for us to work with. There's always a discussion on the front end about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how far we're going to do, who we're going to talk to about it. We never talk to anybody about it without explicit permission. And in the case of one of these where you might remember Jen mentioned the city was worried about the behavior of some of the customer service reps. It turned out that there were people who worked for the city who were doing inappropriate things. And we were asked to provide an accounting of our findings to law enforcement in that case. So it's always a consideration, and in all of these cases, the answer is a little bit different on how we handled it, but we always thought about it. The next question is from Scott Bryant, who's the stormwater manager for the city of Raleigh, and a man that I've known for 25 years. And he says, excellent presentation. Thank you, Scott. It takes experience and insight. That's why my hair's all gone. Did any of the cities seek to recover unbillings from the past, or were the accounts generally updated and then billed going forward? Okay, team, what's the answer to that?
Yeah, I can start with, it obviously depends on kind of the city's regulations and internal processes. If they have a statute of limitations that goes into the past for errors that are made on the city side, some folks go as far back as 3 years, but other organizations will just change it. Sometimes it really depends on if the error is in the customer's favor or the city's favor. Often organizations will go back in time if something is in the customer's favor and won't if it's in the city's favor. It just depends on each city.
City B was happy to just make the adjustments and move forward, and that was in alignment with their policies as well.
For City C, I know that for customers that didn't receive a bill during the conversion process, I know they went back and sent bills to those customers, but things like late fees were waived for those ones.
And I would say in general, the most common response by a city or a utility is a hybrid, kind of like Katie described. And that is, if we didn't send you a bill for a while for something you legit should have been billed and paying for, we will within reason. But if any of our data problems caused the glitch, we're certainly not going to expect late fees or penalties, and we might forgive some of it. So I'm going to call that answered. Thank you, Scott Bryant. For cities A, B, and C, have changes been made to recover revenue and fix issues identified? Do you have any numbers or stats available on percent issues or percent revenue recovered? We have an incredible number of stats on every one of these. The whole thing is data driven. Katie had one slide in there that showed the percentage of the bills that were not as expected. So it's a little different. Anybody want to weigh in for your city or other examples with regard to stats, percentages, and did they fix it? Is the problem gone now? That kind of stuff.
For City A, the analysis is relatively recent, so this identification has just been made, and it was on the order of $500,000 a year for about 1,000 customers. So they have the information needed to be able to make reflections.
The City B analysis was a couple of years ago, and they did make some of those data and system changes that improved or corrected their billing problems. They had been missing out on about 2% of billings. So that was fixed. There was more that wasn't being collected, and I do not have an update on how the collection rate has changed since then.
Okay, anything else on that? Okay, next question is from Thomas Witherspoon. On new billing system implementations, what percentage would you estimate have significant implementation errors with data conversion from the old system? A lot. You think so, Chris?
Yeah, it's actually more of a question of how many errors in the implementation, because basically every implementation is going to have issues that need to be fixed. That's usually a part of the conversion process, is to cleanse the data. So when you go from a legacy mainframe system or from one off-the-shelf solution to another, none of them have the same data format or schema or structure. So when you go through the conversion process, you're trying to identify really what population of accounts are going to be moved over, what historical information is going to be moved over to be preserved, what's going to be discarded. So generally, almost all implementations have their trouble spots. It's really up to staff in combination with their implementation vendors to best identify and test, make sure that everything is valid that you're moving over to the new system.
And I would say, if you think about the situation that leads to a utility replacing its billing system, in many cases, it tends to be our billing system no longer supports all of our processes. The reporting is not what we need. We're trying to do rate structures that are more sophisticated and the billing system doesn't support them very well. Or we're going to advanced metering infrastructure and this is the moment. So there's been some degradation in the current system as it trickles downward in performance. And then everybody's excited about the new system. The thing about the new system is, and Chris always liked this joke that I said, it's a box of empty promises to start with. The new system is just a framework for how to do things, and everything has to be handled on configuration. And the people you bring in as implementers don't know your existing data. So you get a lot of garbage in, garbage out, because garbage accumulated in the old system right before conversion. And the converters who know the new system, even if it's SAP or Oracle or some big dollar system, they don't know and are not likely to be that interested in fixing garbage in your existing. So a lot of it ends up being just, bad data propagates. A lot of conversions don't go very well. And one of the problems that we've seen happen a lot of times is that the conversion firm is really good at covering their own rear end on, that's not our fault, that's not our fault, that's not our fault, and the utility of the city, you got to have somebody there who's looking out for your interests from your payroll or somebody you pay to do it. So what do you do when the public questioned your analysis? Man, that is a terrifically good question. First of all, it doesn't really matter if you're right or not. If you just tell people you're right, it won't be enough. And nobody has enough patience, and most people don't have enough technical background to go through everything we've done and be forced to acknowledge it was done well and thoroughly. So the best answer I have is, if somebody says, yeah, well, you say there's only 1% error and everything's okay, but I don't really believe it. What we say is, you bring me an account that you think was handled improperly, and we will run it all the way to ground 100%. And if it's wrong, we'll fix it. And if it's right, you'll look me in the eye and say it's right. And we can do that because we've built the ecosystem, we've built the queries, we understand what we've got, and we can run it around. And Katie and I did some of that in City C. Anything from anybody else on that one? Okay. Do you recommend this type of analysis just one time or on a frequency? We recommend it very frequently. That was a joke. Would you do it every time you change rates or strategic plan? Did you train cities A, B, and C to do their own in the future? Or do they have the staff and resources? Anybody want to take a run at any of this? Those are some good questions.
Sure, I'll go first. For City B, this was, I think it's fair to say, the first time they had dug pretty deep into their billing data, and they've been using that system for 15 years. Like I mentioned, they were looking toward a billing system conversion. So they did take some additional steps to kind of clean up the data in anticipation of that. But they didn't invest too much, I think, in kind of being able to repeat those same analyses on the system that they had, because it was not expected to be around for too much longer. I do hope that the new system, when put in place, was set up with some reporting to help them, and they of course knew what to be looking out for, so they were in a good position to kind of get that set up well up front.
I will say one of the challenges is, I think of cities and utilities as kind of small, medium, large. Large ones tend to have dedicated staff who are data type folks who, if they have time and the inclination, might do a lot of the same things we do. Little ones tend to not have enough money or enough accounts to have anyone who does this kind of work, and are not in a very good position a lot of the time to control their own destiny and do it themselves over and over again. Medium-sized cities and utilities tend to have enough money to keep things running well, may have staff. So they all have different problems, but honestly, this is a tough question. It's probably one of the things that is handled the least well in the consulting community. Is the goal here is to help somebody solve a problem and help them not have that problem again. And I would say our success rate on training and getting folks to do this themselves has been variable. And then this is the last question. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I think that's pretty good. Could you define what unexpected bills are and give an example for each type? Somebody who's not Keith.
Well, in my section, I tried to provide a definition of unexpected bills. So I'll kind of repeat what I said before, maybe in a little bit of a different way. But you know, those are where unexpected bills are bills where we have recreated what we believe the charge should be based on their rate schedules and account characteristics or any other components of the rate structure. And when that dollar charge amount doesn't match up with what was actually billed to the customer, then we would say that those are unexpected bills. And so, like I said, we also take into account things like adjustments or penalties or things like that. So if you know those are included, then we can move some of those bills from the unexpected to the expected category because we know why you know the charges didn't match up as we would have imagined based on the logic applied. So, and then everything else that's left are bills that are unexpected for some other reason. And those are the ones that we really take a deep dive into and try to figure out why they don't match up with what we would expect.
So
So
the
hopefully that helps.
ecosystem, we build a database with all the data in it, and then we put the base charge, volumetric charge, impervious area charge, flat fees, high strength waste surcharge, whatever all the rates and charges are. Then we're going to sit there and calculate what every bill ought to be. And in one of these examples, we had 10 months of data. I think that was C. We're going to calculate what we think every single bill should have been. And then we're going to compare it to every single bill. And whenever they match, that was expected. Whenever they don't, that was unexpected. And then those get cased out. And that's how you figure out finally the volumetric is always right. It's the minimum bill. When they switch to billing 6 times a year instead of 12, they didn't double the minimum bill so that they get the same money out of 6 hits that they used to get out of 12. And so you're zeroed right in on it. So the cases are different every single place you go. And they're not always cases where people are being underbilled. They might be being overbilled. Another place that was an A, B, or C, we had a lot of outside the city ratepayers being billed the inside the city rate. And that was more of a geographic analysis, but that's losing money, but it could have gone the other way. So that's how unexpected bills would be defined. That was the last question. So it seems like we're going to land the plane on the runway, timing wise. And I'd like to restate how happy we are to have gotten good turnout for this. And we appreciate folks coming and listening to what we have to say. I think we will send a follow-up to people with a link to a recording of this if you want it. And just thanks again for coming today. And for those of you I know, I hope I see you again face-to-face soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.